I'm Louisa Scioscia Stephens. It's May 14th, 2004. We're in Grand Central Station, New York, New York. I'm 57 years old, and I'm interviewing the Superintendent of Schools in Hastings-on-Hudson and my friend, Dr. John Russell.
And I'm Jay Russell. I'm 55 years old, and I'm in Grand Central, too.
So, Jay, right starting off, I was going to ask you, what are some of the things that are the same and what are some of the things that are different about your own personal elementary school education and the elementary school education that kids in Hastings get?
The differences really come to mind before the similarities, to tell you the truth. I grew up in Brooklyn in the 50s, is a fair 50s, 60s. And I went to parochial schools there. And there was very much, although people from outside the city often associate Brooklyn as the place where you grew up, people who lived in Brooklyn didn't. It was always a neighborhood concept, and it was poorly defined, but in some sense in terms of the actual boundaries, but very clearly defined by who was in that neighborhood. So the parochial schools tended to be the local schools. And I went to a parochial school. I have a picture, I know you've seen it in my office, of my second grade class. And written on the blackboard with this incredible penmanship that only a nun could possibly have is the attendance for that day. And there were 56 boys and 32 girls, 88 kids in my second grade class. And needless to say, with one teacher, a nun, you couldn't lose control. And so control became the dominant thing that I remember. And sometimes that control was done very unpleasantly. In fact, that's one of the long-lasting, unpleasant memories I have, is that it seemed cruel to me how they kept control of the class. But again, standing back and saying 88 kids in one class, one teacher. There was no such thing as special education back then. There was no such thing as extra help for anybody. It was one nun, and she taught the best she could, I guess. And I would imagine that she had limited education too. So it was a lot of whacks across the knuckles with big rulers and really horrible stuff.
Would you mind giving some examples of just the way control was maintained in the
Well, that was one, the wax against the knuckle.
Well, there was a variety. Intimidation was the biggest one, and they were very good at making examples. So there was public humiliation was a key factor here. For example, if you had to go to the bathroom, I remember this distinctly, this particular incident. Boy in the class had to go to the bathroom, and you weren't allowed to go to the bathroom except at certain times, and that was as I recall, it was a long time ago, but as I recall, it was right before lunch they let you go, or right after lunch, but not in between. This one kid raised his hand and said he had to go to the bathroom. No. Raised his hand again, said he has to really go to the bathroom. No. He peed in his pants. Embarrassing enough, the nun made him stand up and show everybody what he did, and then made him clean up the mess that he had made. I remember them making people sit in garbage cans, sit in the waste paper basket in the corner, facing away from the corner. Abuse, it wouldn't be tolerated today. And back then, the general notion was that if you went home and told your parents about something like this, you'd get in more trouble. What did you do to make the nun behave so badly? And I didn't do anything. And it's just amazing, I think, that we got through it, and it was really getting through it. The irony is that I myself feel like I learned a lot of information then, but it's affected me long term in that I never want to have a school that I'm associated with be anything other than a warm and caring place for kids. So it had a real profound effect on me. The meanness of the place. There were mean people in there.
Was there anything good? Oh, I guess you said you learned a lot. Was there anything else that you can pull out that you liked about it?
Yeah, there were, because there was a sense of camaraderie among the kids. It's kind of like
Survivors.
a Lord of the Flies kind of camaraderie. But there were good friendships and strong friendships, and a sense of belonging because you went through the same experience. I think it's maybe akin to prisoner of war syndrome. I think it's where you make bonds that you might not ordinarily have made.
Did you go all the way through high school and everything in parochial schools?
Yeah, I did. I went to St. Thomas Aquinas Elementary School in Brooklyn, and then I went to Severian High School in Brooklyn.
And were they? Did it abate? Did the meanness abate as you got older, or was it?
A bit. High school was the exception. There were still people in high school though who were physically abusive to kids, but it was. I'm not sure if the actual abuse level got less, or you became
Inured to it.
and able to deal with it and prevent it. You learned how to prevent it. You learned what behaviors provoked it, and you avoided those behaviors. Now, that might have been part of it too. But my sense is Severian was a good high school, academically really good, and I don't have the same level of unpleasant memories with Severian as I do with elementary school. Elementary school was very unpleasant.
And elementary school was co-ed. Was the high school also?
No, elementary school was co-ed. Again, for whatever reason, we were co-ed up until second grade, and then third grade it was boys went one way, girls went the other way, and the high school was the same way. It was single-sex high schools.
So from third grade through 12th, you were in single sex.
All right.
And your sisters?
My sisters. You know the story about my sisters.
Tell that story.
That's so bizarre. My parents were both born in 1905, and although I didn't know that because my mother lied about her age for her whole life, I didn't find out until I buried her, believe it or not, her real age when I got her a second birth certificate, because I actually had a birth certificate that she had changed, and I didn't know. So what happened was I took Jerry, my wife, when we were going out with each other. I took her home to my house in Brooklyn for Sunday dinner with my parents. And my father used to work 4 to 12. So Sunday dinner was always at 2 o'clock. And that's when we had dinner. So we're sitting at the dinner table, and Jerry made a comment and said something like, it's funny how your 3 children are so different, and growing up in the same family, same household. And she meant it, I think, from the perspective of, what we were interested in, what we did, our education, that kind of thing. And so my father turns and he said, well, that's really not that surprising. And she said, well, why not? She said, well, he said, Eleanor, my oldest sister, she's adopted. So I said, what? And he said, yeah, you knew that. I said, believe me, if I knew it, I would know it. And he said, yeah. And it's a really curious story. And it's also it's a kind of a microcosm of the time and a little bit about the culture. My father and his uncle were only about 7 years apart in age, and they were friendly. And my mother and father couldn't have children for whatever reason. And my uncle and his wife had a child, my sister Eleanor. And her mother died. And my uncle essentially gave Eleanor to my father and mother to raise. And they eventually adopted her. But they neglected to tell me about that. So after I got over the shock, now I'm 20 years old. And I'm sitting at the car. I said, Jesus, I can't believe that Eleanor's not really my sister. She's actually my cousin. And he said, wow. He said, you know about Lynn, my other sister. I said, what do you mean I know about Lynn? What about Lynn? He said, well, she's adopted. And she was actually adopted from that in Brooklyn. It was a fairly famous orphanage, and the Angel of Guardian Home. And she was also adopted. So both of my sisters were adopted. One was actually my cousin, and one is no relation. But I didn't find out till I was 20. And
In front of your girlfriend.
right, right. But it was curious is that, and this still kind of amazes me. It didn't change my relationship with either one of them. You know, and
Right.
as I think as a parent, if I was adopting a child, to tell or not to tell, what would it change? It's funny that it actually had no effect on my relationship with them. It made me curious about my parents, what else they didn't tell me, but that was a strange thing. So
But you were not adopted.
no, I was the miracle baby because my mother had me when she was 43, and they didn't expect that. So.
Well, she'd been telling everybody she was 30, so.
No, she didn't lie that much. Well, the reason she lied, again, this is, it's much more a period kind of piece. She lied because my father was actually younger than her, and at that time, you know, I forget when they were married, but in the 1920s, I guess, that was unseemly. If you married a younger man, you know, you were robbing the cradle, and she didn't want to deal with
Even
that.
though it was less than a year. Must have been less than a year.
It was less. It was less than a year. My mother went to such lengths. She even fabricated and changed the birth order of her siblings in order to make the story work. So she was very much fixated on her age vis-a-vis my father's age.
Did your sisters know that they were adopted?
Eleanor definitely knew that she was adopted, my older sister, and I'm not sure about my sister Lynn, even as I sit here today. It's peculiar that I don't know that, but I still don't. I would imagine so, because I think Lynn was about 4 when she was adopted, so I would say, and they never said anything to me. Nobody ever said anything to me. Nobody.
How old were they when you were born?
Eleanor is 11 years older than me, and Lynn is 8 years older than me. So
Right, so they were already established.
yeah.
Yeah. So where was your mother born in 1905? Where?
My mother was born in this country, in Brooklyn, and my father was born, I'm not sure. My grandmother on my father's side, my grandmother and grandfather moved, and this may be a slight hyperbole, but something like 18 times from the time he was born till the time he was 16. They moved, again, I'm told that was not that uncommon in New York, and they lived in New Jersey too. So in the metropolitan area, in cities, that wasn't that uncommon, because I don't think leases were quite as prevalent as they are today.
Right.
And what they did was, as soon as a better apartment came available, they moved that day. In fact,
Right.
my father told the story that he went to school one day, came home, and there was nothing in the place where he left. No note, nothing. And my grandparents had moved to another apartment in the same building. So my mother, you asked the question, my mother was born here, my father was born here. Both my grandparents on my mother's side were born in Ireland. And on my grandfather's side, and on my father's side, excuse me, my grandmother was born in this country. Her mother and father were born in Norway. And my grandfather is the mystery character in the story. And another sub story here. When my father died, I was at the wake, and he had 2 brothers remaining, but his closest brother came to the wake, and I was sitting next to him in the wake, and I said, Uncle Ed, I know about where Grandma's folks came from, Kragerø, Norway. I mean, I know that. I said, I know about where my mother's family came from, on both sides. I said, I don't know much about, Grandpa, except that, Russell is an English name. So he looks around conspiratorially and around the wake, and he walks up and he whispers, he said, Russell may not be our actual name. So I said, what? What are you talking about? He said, well, it might have been changed when your grandfather's father came to this country. So my grandfather was born here. And so I said, changed? I said, well, why would they change an English name? He said, well, probably not English. So I said, well, what is it? And he Again, he literally checks around, who's around us, whispers, "We may be Polish." I said, "Polish?" So that part of the, it's sad that they were almost embarrassed that we were Polish. But so I have that hybrid vigor that comes when you mix various lines, some Irish, some Norwegian, and some Polish. But what happened to me when I was 16 is I actually went to Ireland, where my grandfather had left this village when he was 14 years old and came to this country. And I smoked back then. I was standing on a corner having a cigarette in the village where my grandfather left, I guess, 80 years before, something like that. And this guy walks up to me, and he said, "Oh," he says, "so you're the Kaiser's son, aren't you?" And so I said, "Excuse me?" I said, "I'm from America." I said, "I think you must have me confused with somebody else." He goes, "No, no, no." He said, "You're the Kaiser's son." I said, "I don't know anybody named the Kaiser." He said, "You're not Jack Carmody's son?" I said, "Jack Carmody?" I said, "That's my grandfather." So, amazingly, this guy saw in me my grandfather, who had been out of there, I don't know, 70 years or something. Never went back. My grandfather never went back. So it's too bad. I guess what I'm connecting is that maybe I'll go walk around Poland until somebody does the same thing. But I lost that piece of the history. Don't know about the Polish side.
Did you end up having a conversation with that man?
Yeah, I did. Very interesting. My grandfather, when he came to this country, came by himself, 14. He had cousins who lived in Yonkers. He lived with them for a while, and he got a job, my grandfather, on the docks unloading ships. And he eventually worked himself up to be the foreman of a dock. And this guy told me that, he said, he said, "Your grandfather was a great man, great man." He said, if anybody from this village went to New York, they were told to look up your grandfather. He said, when I went over, this guy had been, he knew my grandfather when he was here, but I didn't know that. He had seen my grandfather. He actually had left Ireland, came to America, worked, and then went back and retired in Ireland. So he said, when I went to Ireland, he said, I met your grandfather, and he gave me a job. He said, but you know what he did? He said, he would ask you, how are you with your hands? And if you said you were good, he would go outside and box you. And if you put up a good fight, you got a job. So my grandfather was quite a character. He had his eye actually taken out in a barroom brawl. And after my grandparents died and my mother died, because we weren't allowed to talk about this, I think it was my mother's sister fessed up and told me a great story about my grandfather. Because I always wondered, I didn't know how, he had a patch on his eye.
Right.
And he died when I was 5 or 6. But the one thing I remembered about him was this patch. And so I asked, my mother would never say, never tell me. So after my mother died, my aunt told me that he had been in a barroom fight. She said, their brother, my uncle Martin, would get home from school, and my grandmother would, on Fridays, because my grandfather got paid on Fridays, my uncle had to go to the bar and get my grandfather out of the bar before he spent all his money. And he used to do this every time my uncle would go to the bar. If he had been there a while and was feeling,
Generous.
feeling full of himself, he would stop everybody and said, "This is my son Martin, and he can lick any man in this bar." My uncle would say, "Oh God, get me out of here, please." So he was quite a character.
I'm sorry.
You go.
Any other stories about him that stand out in your mind?
About my grandfather? No, just he was a brawler, I guess, a tough guy. But they went through a lot.
Well, you said he came over by himself when he was 14?
14. So, I guess that was the way. He was one of those kids who had to get grown up quickly and tough quickly, and he did. And he worked on the docks, which, again, it's not really a place for the meek. And he wasn't. So.
How did you meet your grandmother?
I don't know. He met her in this country, though, not in Ireland. And you talk about opposites attracting. In my memory, there couldn't have been two different people. this wild Irishman who may have been a bit of a thug almost, and my grandmother, who always struck me as being so kind and gentle and loving, and I got to know her a little bit better because she died much later.
Do you think they had a happy marriage?
No.
No. And how about your parents?
My parents, in terms of their marriage,
Yeah. How did they meet, and did they have a happy marriage?
I don't know how they met. They met during the Depression, and I think their marriage was basically happy. I know that money was an issue for an awful long time. My father was so proud that he was able to. He had to quit. He didn't finish high school, and then went to night school to finish. And during the Depression, in 1932, he got a job. He passed the fire department test and got a job as a New York City fireman. And he used to tell me that, he said, I was competing against college guys, and he said, and I got the job. And so he was very proud of the fact that he was able to get a city job with a pension and all that. So, then my mother, she was, again, this is I think more of the time than anything else, she was a housewife. And she had been a secretary or a stenographer or something like that. And there was no thought of women working then.
Right.
If you were married in a family, that's what you did. And so working outside the house. And so that's what she did.
So was it, your father was a fireman, so he then had a pension and a regular job. So it wasn't really too much of a financial sacrifice to send you to parochial school, or was it?
No, it was.
It was.
Yeah, it still was. That's firemen still don't make that much money, but back then they made even less. And I think the elementary school was okay, but the high school was, I think the tuition was $300 a year, and that was a big deal.
Yeah. So did your sisters go to parochial school?
They did. My sister Lynn got thrown out of, I think, 2 different parochial schools.
This sounds like a really great story.
No, it's not for academics. She was incredibly lazy, and she did not. Did she? No. I think she graduated from Midwood High School, which is a good high school, public school in the city. I mean, my parents had this notion that public schools weren't as good, and back then that wasn't true. Public schools in the city were very good, and my other sister graduated from a parochial school.
So what drew you to education as an adult?
It was serendipitous. I had no intention of going into education. I was going to be the next Jacques Cousteau.
Ah.
I was a biology major in college, and I was going to get a doctorate in marine biology. And I realized early on that in order to understand the biology of the oceans, you had to understand the physics of the oceans. So I went and was getting my master's in physical oceanography at NYU. And a friend of mine from college called me. He said, "You got to help me. You got to help me." I said, "Well, I'll help you if I can. How? What do you want me to do?" He said, "Well," let me tell you what happened. He said, I went and interviewed for a job at Bishop Riley High School, which is where he graduated from. And he said, and they gave me the job. I said, well, how's that a
Good.
problem? Good for you. And so he said, my girlfriend lives in the Bronx, and she told me to go interview at a school up there, and I did, and they gave me a job there, and I accepted it. So I said, so you accepted 2 jobs? Called one of them up and tell him no. He said, "Oh, I can't." He said, "These are the guys who taught me." He said, "They know me." He said, "It'd be terrible." He said, "There's only one way I can get out of this gracefully." So I said, "How?" He said, "Well," he said, "I actually already did it." I said, "You did what?" He said, "I told them that I knew somebody who could teach biology." So I said, "Great, have that person go interview or whatever." He said, "Well, will you?" And I said, "What?" So I said, it was like that Butterfly McQueen line in Gone with the Wind. I don't know nothing about birthing no babies. I said, "I don't know anything about teaching." And he said, "Oh, just go for the interview. That's all you have to do. Just go for the interview. Please, please." I said, "All right, I'll go." So I went for the interview, and I never got out of the building. Once again, the religious intimidated me into doing this type of work to my advantage. Before I left, I had a job. And I just pity the poor kids I taught that first year, because I really didn't know what I was doing. I taught the way I was taught, which is undoubtedly not very well. Except I really liked the kids and I liked teaching, so I said, yeah, let me go. And I went to school. I finished my master's the first semester. I finished in January, and then I went to Hunter.
So that master's, that was in
Physical
oceanography?
oceanography, yeah. I got that in January. And then I went to Hunter for education courses, and I got certified. And I taught there one more year at Bishop Riley High School in Fresh Meadow, Queens. And then I became a certified teacher. And I went up to Darien, and I taught in Darien. And when I got to Darien, I got involved in the teachers union. And I realized that the people who were running the schools, that in my youthful exuberance, I thought that I could do just as good a job as they could. So I decided to go get a master's degree in administration and supervision, and I did that.
You were in your 20s at that time?
Oh, God. Yeah, I guess late 20s. And then I got a little bit nervous, and I wasn't sure that I would like administration if I went to administration. And then I didn't know whether I could go back to teaching. That's when teaching jobs were hard to come by. So as a safety and as also as a piece that I thought would be attractive, I decided to go get my MBA. So I went and got my MBA from UConn, and then I got an administrative job in Greenwich as what they called a teacher leader. I taught math, and half-time I was an administrator half-time. And then I went to Harrison, where I was an assistant principal, and then to Pelham, where I was assistant superintendent. No, I left out. I was principal for 10 years. I left out a significant portion. I was principal of an elementary school in Harrison for 10 years, which I loved. I loved being a principal of an elementary school. It was a great job. And went to Pelham. I was assistant superintendent there for 3 years and didn't like it at all. I tell people now that if I mentor them, I said, look, you have to be a very special person to have a job that begins with the word assistant for more than a year or two. I said, I'm not criticizing it, but it's not for me. If I'm going to have anything with the word assistant on it, I want to do it for whatever I need to and get out of it, because you get to do all the stuff that the non-assistant doesn't want to do.
Right.
So.
Well, what was the best part about being the principal in the elementary school?
Oh, the kids. Kids are just amazing, And also, the sense that you could do something and really create something. There was that. You could create an atmosphere and an environment in the school that really was special.
So you felt like you did that. You came into Harrison and you left feeling like you'd changed the environment there?
Yeah, I did. Not me, but with the help of others. And it was an uphill battle. I went into a school that was in disarray. In fact, what really happened was I was assistant principal at the middle school in Harrison, and for 1 year. And at the end of the year, the superintendent called me in. He said, listen, I need to talk to you about next year. So I said, oh, what? He said, I've got to make some changes. So I said, yeah. He said, and in order to do this, the changes I have to make, he said, unfortunately, I'm going to have to eliminate the assistant principalship at the middle school. So I want to know, he said, would you be interested in being principal at the elementary school? So I said, well, let's see. I can have no job, or I can get a promotion and a raise. So I said, okay. And I really went out on a limb because my knowledge of elementary education was extraordinarily limited. And it was a bizarre situation. And again, this would never happen today, the opportunity I got. I was interviewed only by the Board of Education. He said, come in, I want you to meet the board. I went in one day, talked to the board. Next day I had the job. There were no parents, no students, no community members. Nobody was involved. And on top of that, they didn't even announce that I was the principal. The first day back to school, we're in this huge meeting with all district-wide faculty, and he doesn't introduce me. He just says, okay, Harrison Avenue faculty will meet in the choral room with your principal. And they're all looking around, who is it? I don't walk in and say, hi, I'm your new principal. And I don't know an awful lot about what we're going to be doing together, but I'm willing to learn with you. So it was an uphill battle. And the end result was great, though, just great.
Were the teachers resistant?
The teachers were, I think, had been through a very bad time. The reason the position became open was the guy who had been principal had not done a very good job. In fact, he'd done a terrible job. And he used to come in, they used to say, and he'd essentially lock himself in his office. So the parents were angry at everybody. The teachers felt unprotected, so they were angry at everybody. So everybody had circled their wagons. And I had a lot of work to do to uncircle the wagons and get people working together, and did eventually.
So what are the things? What does someone look for to make a good principal?
Well, I think knowing when to say yes, you're right, we should change that, and knowing when to say no, you're not right, and I appreciate your point of view, but we're not going to change that. I think a lot of it is interpersonal skills and social emotional skills. People are entrusting you with their most precious possession, their kids. And, you damn well better take that seriously just for that reason, that you're in charge of this precious little person, and, you want that to come out perfect. And perfect means more than that they know know how to read, write, and do math. It means that they're healthy, capable people and feel good about themselves. So you need somebody with some expert knowledge. Obviously, you can't. I would not have hired me as that elementary principal at that time because I didn't know enough. You really need to know education. You need to know learning theory, at least, or be willing to and able to learn it quickly. You need to be able to work with people and create a sense of larger purpose. Teachers working in isolation are limited. When teachers are working together for common purposes, it's boundless. You can do almost anything. It's amazing what you can do. So you need that combination of someone who can bring people together, someone who's strong enough to say, yes, I'm going to change, and strong enough to say, no, I'm not going to change, depending on the issue and the circumstances. And someone who's smart enough or knowledgeable enough about the important parts of educational learning theory and education. And I think those are the key pieces. It's hard work. Somebody's got to be willing to work hard. You can't, it's not an 8 to 4 job.
And how did you make that transition from your own childhood education? I mean, was that happening gradually all the way along? Your mind was changing, your vision was changing, or did you come to this elementary school with pretty much just your elementary background?
I did, but I was lucky. I was lucky and smart enough to have some very good teachers in that school, and I didn't pretend that I knew more than them. I really engaged them in conversations about teaching and learning and about kids, and I really went out of my way to learn on the job. So I became part of an internet consortium that you attended with me,
Right?
and that was a great
Wonderful.
learning experience. And I got to interact with people who were involved in lighthouse school districts around the country, and I learned a lot. And the whole premise of that consortium was that we could rob good ideas from each other, and I did. And and I went back to school and got my doctorate, and that all that added to it. But it was a lot of listening carefully to people and giving people an opportunity to share their expertise. A lot of times I think people get shut out, and they know they're very knowledgeable, and we don't let them share it. So I listened and learned on the job, and I had very good people. I was lucky.
So, how about your own family education? Your parents, your grandparents. Was their education similar to yours?
No. I don't think. I don't know this for certain, but I'd be surprised if any of my grandparents went beyond 8th grade in terms of their education. As I said, I know my father got a high school diploma, but after the
But he
fact,
sweated it out.
my mother got a high school diploma, and but that's when they were tracked, and she was in business or whatever they used to call it. And so my mother and father both did, but not my grandparents. In fact, my grandmother, as I say, how sweet she was, but I remember my cousin Frank, who was a little bit older than me, was the first member of our family to have a shot at going to college. He was going to college, and I remember when he got into college, and my aunt was saying, "Oh, Frank was accepted in college. He's going to college," and she was so happy. And my grandmother was sitting there, and they said to her, "Did you hear Frank is going to college?" She said, "Yeah, I heard." And so finally I said, "Well, why aren't you excited about him going to college?" And she said, "He always had notions about himself." So, it was that there was a sense of showing up your father wasn't such a great thing. Now, but my cousin's father he was a graduate of Fordham Law School, so he was the educated guy in the family. He was a graduate of Fordham University and Fordham Law.
It's fascinating to me. I've from the very beginning, I've always thought you're such a great superintendent. It's fascinating to see how it comes together, how someone grows up from a little kid, and has those interests.
Yeah, I guess to a degree, some of that was shaped. The stuff we've done with social emotional learning in the school may be a residue somehow, and I'd have to go through
lacks that you had.
long hours of therapy to actually get to that, but it may be part of that. And having high expectations for every kid, and not being willing to settle.
What are your favorite things about the job you have now?
The kids.
Same as Harrison,
Yeah,
elementary school, right?
Yeah.
The kids.
I like being superintendent in Hastings because I'm in the school with the kids. And we have great community, very interesting, challenging community, keeps me on my toes, very supportive, but it's just a great mix of different opinions, and it's really, it's invigorating.
So, what would you say to the whole nation about education? Let's say you had a wand that you could kind of give a wish to education for the nation.
Places like New York City become virtually impossible to fix because of their size. And so the first thing was, I think local schools are the key. And so that local values guide the school process. And that we need to, I'm a very strong supporter of this campaign for financial equity in New York State. This is the 50th anniversary of Brown versus the Board of Education. I still think it's unequal education, and I think we need to fix that. I think that we need to fund schools equally across the country. I think a child growing up in Brooklyn should have the same educational opportunities as a child growing up in Hastings. I don't know how to fix that, but that's something we need to fix. And we need to get the right people teaching. I think our teaching ranks have improved immensely during my career. We've gotten much better, smarter, more energetic, more caring people in education, and we need to continue to work on that. We need to continue to stress that teachers need to be experts in two things. They need to be expert in kids, and they need to be the actual kids they have in the class. They need to really know those kids, so you need to keep class sizes reasonable. And they need to be experts in teaching and learning, so they really have to go to school and be supported and be required. I don't think it should be optional to take a certain number of courses every year to keep up their skills and keep current in the subject area that they teach.
Any parting thoughts? That was a parting thought, actually.
Yeah, I guess. I like what I do. I guess, I'm lucky that I stumbled into the career I did and feel good about it.
Well, thank you very much, Jay, for this interview.